Among serial killers in the U.S., Gary Ridgway became the most prolific one ever known when in 2003 he confessed to a staggering 48 murders. And while many people recognize the name Gary Ridgway, there's another killer who claims to have killed one more victim than Gary, and his name is Robert Browne. I'm Andy Fitzgerald, and thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Everytown. From 1970 to 1995, Louisiana native Robert Browne had left a trail of dead bodies in his home state and many others, including Colorado, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, California, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Washington. He was ultimately handed down guilty verdicts for 2 murders, but Robert wrote authorities telling them that he actually killed 49 people, making him the devil's right-hand man. Let's get to know Mr. Browne in today's episode, and when we're done, if you didn't know his name before this, you'll be sure to remember him when we're through. Robert Browne came from a big family. He was the youngest of 9 children with 3 sets of twins, including him and his twin sister. He was born on October 31st, 1952, in the small town of Coushatta, Louisiana. The Browne family had a dairy farm business, and Robert's father, Ronald, was later designated as deputy sheriff at the Red River Sheriff's Office. One of his brothers much later became a Louisiana state trooper as well. And it's worth noting that depression once gripped the family when Robert's grandfather, the father of his mother Beulah, had drowned himself in a receptacle by weighing a chain around his neck. It was highly taboo in the small town, but the community remained kind to the Browne family and considered them a good family because all 9 children were well taken care of. Robert was looked at as an intelligent student at the Coushatta High School, where he excelled in math and achieved average grades. People found him shy yet courteous, and he may have had a quick mind, but he also had a very bad temper. Robert's heart was not into studying, and before he turned 17, back in 1969, he left school to join the Army. During his time, he toured Vietnam twice and South Korea once as a medic, but in 1976, he was honorably discharged for drug abuse. After a stint in the Army, Mr. Browne held different jobs in and around Louisiana, Texas, and Colorado. He did things like deliver flowers, he worked as a clerk at a quick stop, and he also drove a truck. He got married 6 times, but those all ended in divorce. The 6 women were all similar in appearance and all were petite, weighing between 95 and 125 pounds. And it's believed his ex-wives are still alive. Robert had a child named Thomas with his second wife, a Vietnamese girl. The reason his relationships never worked, at least according to his last 3 wives, was that Mr. Browne would become physically abusive or highly irrational over the simplest mistakes.
I am so sick of you. Your whole goddamn family, I'm sick of all of
He even told his 5th wife that he hated women and cons. He worked steadily, though, from 1981 until 1988, with the exception of a 10-month gap where he served a prison sentence for stealing a truck in '86. He was also arrested for stealing a church bell and was linked to various drug charges, burglaries, arsons, and even animal cruelty. All this was part of Robert's criminal history, which was soaked in blood, with a series of murders he claimed to have started back in 1980. The holidays are right around the corner, and luckily HelloFresh is here to help make this busy time of year easier on us with their handcrafted recipes and pre-portioned ingredients delivered right to your door. You can spend less time meal planning and prepping and more time with those you love. At my house, We eat HelloFresh at least 3 times a week because their meals are all laid out, easy to cook, easy to clean, and most importantly, taste amazing. They have quick and easy options for you, like their 20-minute meals to save even more time. Plus, they are cheaper than buying groceries and 25% cheaper than takeout. The quality of ingredients are top-notch, and with over 35 recipes, there's something for everyone. You can also easily customize your recipes to your liking by swapping out proteins or sides, upgrading protein choices, and even adding protein to a veggie meal. Right now, go to HelloFresh.com and use the code ScaryMysteries60 for 60% off plus free shipping. I'm telling you, you need to give them a try, and I know you'll get hooked just like I did. So take advantage of this awesome offer and go to HelloFresh.com and use code ScaryMysteries60 for 60% off plus free shipping. The killing spree of Robert Browne started in 1980. According to him, it was done in South Korea, but authorities couldn't verify this. In the same year, a 16-year-old girl from his hometown of Louisiana became his first victim in the U.S. There were numerous murders that followed, and Robert was finally captured by authorities after he killed 13-year-old Heather Dawn Church from Black Forest, about 12 miles northeast of Colorado Springs. It was on September 17, 1991, when the honors student was left at home to babysit her 5-year-old brother Sage. Their mom and 2 brothers had gone to a Boy Scouts meeting. To their horror, Heather was nowhere to be found when they returned home. Despite a grueling search effort, the police couldn't initially find the teenage girl. When the case was featured on true crime TV shows, police received tips. And then finally, 2 years later, on September 16th of 93, Heather's remains were found on Rampart Range Road by a transient camper. The coroner's findings of the cause of death was ruled as blunt force trauma to the head. Fortunately, Robert left evidence at the crime scene through his fingerprints found on a window screen, which was used to conclusively link him to Heather's death. One of the investigators, Tom Carney, focused on matching the fingerprints left at the crime scene with the ones found in a car theft case Robert was entangled in earlier in Louisiana. So then, on March 28, 1995, he was arrested and charged with Heather's murder. After a while, DA John Anderson proposed a plea bargain for Mr. Browne, in which he would plead guilty to Heather's murder in exchange for the state not seeking a death sentence against him, and they would also drop all additional charges except for the first-degree murder. Robert accepted it, and was then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While incarcerated, over the years, Robert started writing letters with cryptic messages to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. Part of one of his messages said, "7 sacred virgins entombed side by side. Those less worthy are scattered wide. The score is you 1, the other team 48. The letter included a hand-drawn map with outlines of Colorado, Washington, California, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, with a body count written inside each state, totaling 48. Mr. Browne discussed the slangs and sporadic meetings and an exchange of letters he had with Charlie Hess, a Sheriff's Department cold case investigator, over the course of 4 years. Investigator Hess got involved after Mr. Browne started writing letters deputies described as taunting to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, but the letters abruptly broke off. Mr. Hess said, We started by writing a very direct letter to Robert, indicating who we were. He also said Robert then started the correspondence, but he didn't want the investigators to come and see him in person. However, when he broke off communication again, investigators did go to see him, and Robert agreed to resume their correspondence. Charlie said, little by little, he gave us bits of information. Being non-judgmental was necessary. It became obvious with Robert that most things were a negotiation. If I can have a single cell, I'll tell you this. If I can have this, I can give you 3 murders. But Charlie said all the things Robert asked for were reasonable with the laws and rules. Robert's confession incited a new investigation that aimed to find out the veracity of his claims, and private communications with the convicted killer were done by investigators. Robert piqued their interest by opening a can of more monstrous murders he had done, which according to him reached 49 in total. Thus, he was dubbed as the Devil's right-hand man. Before Heather became his victim in 1991, there were others that came before and after her, in which Robert was a suspect. In his confessions and letters, Robert claimed he shot some of his victims, strangled others, and in one case, used a pair of leather shoelaces. He knocked out one woman with ether and then used an ice pick on her. He put a rag soaked in ant killer over another victim's face and stabbed her nearly 30 times with a screwdriver. He had also dismembered the remains of most of his victims and then disposed of them in isolated areas. If Mr. Browne was telling the truth about killing 49 people across the country, his crimes practically constituted a manual on the many ways in which to kill. Undoubtedly, these ladies and girls all suffered in his devilish hands. In March of 1980, Robert met 16-year-old Catherine Hayes, also from Coushatta, at Uncle Alfred's Fried Chicken in the parking lot, and she offered a ride to her mom's house where Robert said they had consensual sex. Things turned ugly, though, when they argued after, and the quick-tempered serial killer strangled Catherine using shoelaces after she fell asleep. He then dumped her body off a bridge. 7 months after that, Catherine's skull was found in the Little Nantachi Creek near St. Maurice on October 16th, but it was identified 2 weeks later on November 1st. During the last day of March of that year, another woman from Coushatta became Robert's target. Faye Self was having a chill night with friends at a bar. She had left her child with her mother and had to leave the bar to pick up the kid. She was headed out to the parking lot, and during that night, Faye mysteriously vanished. Robert actually spotted Faye at the club and took an interest in her. So when Faye got home, he snuck into her apartment while she was sleeping. Robert soaked a rag in chloroform and covered Faye's face with it to keep her asleep. As he was looking for a rope to strangle her, Faye was suffocated to death, so Robert had to dispose of her remains in the Red River. Sadly, her body has never been found. Two months had passed when Robert managed to strike again in his hometown, where he victimized his neighbor, Wanda Hudson. The 20-year-old worked as a supermarket checker and lived in the Rivertown apartment complex in Coushatta, which was in the same neighborhood as Robert's. He claimed he broke into her apartment and made her go unconscious by using red ant killer containing ether. Then Miss Hudson was brutally stabbed to death with a screwdriver. Her boyfriend found her body, and the autopsy showed she was possibly raped and stabbed 30 times. Shocked and saddened, the local community raised $4,000 as a reward for any information that could lead to an arrest in the case. Nadia Mendoza, a 17-year-old teenager from Sugar Land, Texas, was the next victim of Robert's very violent, murderous mind on February 6, 1984. His first after 4 years and in another state. The two met at a strip club, according to Robert, who invited her to his hotel room where they had sex. He then beat her, strangled, and dismembered her body using a dull butcher's knife. Her body was found along Highway 59 in Houston, decapitated with a severed leg and approximately 25 stab wounds in the chest and stomach. Less than a month after that, in the Texan town of Flatonia, the body of a dead woman, identified as Melody Bush, was found in a drainage ditch where it was believed she was killed on March 20th. Robert said they met at a motel bar and later agreed to have sex at his room. Robert claimed he used ether to leave her unconscious and then stabbed her to death, but the autopsy report revealed that her cause of death was acute acetone poisoning. Robert then relocated to Colorado Springs, Colorado by 1987. On November 10th of that year, his criminal instinct was on the rise again. A 15-year-old young wife named Rocio Sperry oddly disappeared after watching a movie. "12 days later, Rocio's husband, Joseph, found her empty car in a parking lot. In his confession, Mr. Browne said he dismembered Rocio's body and scattered the parts in an isolated area, but those were never found. Joseph became a suspect for a very long time, and it adversely affected him, turning him to drugs and having multiple failed marriages after that. His name, though, was finally cleared, only when Robert confessed and pleaded guilty in 1995. But 4 years after that murder, on September 17, 1991, a Colorado Springs 13-year-old teen named Heather Church was abducted from her Black Forest, El Paso County home while babysitting her younger brother. The many search efforts of the police were futile because they weren't able to locate Heather alive, or at least her remains if she had died. Things took a positive turn, though, when 2 years later, on September 16th of 93, a camper found her remains on Rampart Range Road. As mentioned before, this case was significant because the evidence left at the crime scene was eventually what brought down Robert in 1995. But barely 2 months later, Robert unleashed the devil in him, and this time, it was in West Memphis, Arkansas. He victimized a 21-year-old suspected prostitute, Lisa Lowe, in mid-October of 1991. Like in some of the previous cases, the two had met at a bar in Memphis, and Robert paid Lisa to do sexual favors for him. They then drove to a wooded area near West Memphis off Interstate 40, and things turned gruesome when, after they had sex, Robert strangled Miss Lowe and may possibly had shot her before throwing her body into the St. Francis River where she was found floating on November 3rd, 1991. Surprisingly, after targeting a string of women, Robert set his eyes on a man named Timothy Warren, a 39-year-old employee of Tulsa's Mohawk Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Robert met Timothy at a restaurant and persuaded him that they could go have sex at Mohawk Park, which was reputed as a cruising location. When they arrived there and exited their truck, Robert overpowered his victim and shot Timothy. So then, in the early morning hours of March 12th of 1992, the park's employees found Mr. Warren's body on the shores of a lagoon, clad only in his pants, which were wrapped around his thighs, and he had two .22 caliber gunshots to his head. Several hours later, Timothy's car was then located near Claremore Lake. Initially, while investigators were skeptical of Robert's claims, interest in his confessions were bolstered after he accepted a plea deal with regards to the 1987 murder of 15-year-old Rocio Sperry. Robert was handed another life sentence for Rocio's case, aside from the one that involved the murder of Heather Church. The reception towards the claims of Robert have always been mixed. While seasoned investigators and crime writers like Robert Ressler and James Allen Fox stated that Robert was likely responsible for more murders than the 2 convictions he had so far. They've also noted that Mr. Browne is most certainly exaggerating when it comes to the number of victims. When asked if any of his victims ever got away, Robert said, "None ever got away. Never gave the opportunity. If you're going to do it, just do it." In court papers, Browne is painted as a picture of a predator who loathed women and thought he was justified in killing them because they were cheating on their husbands and boyfriends, in many cases with him. Robert, who has had 6 failed marriages, said he has been disappointed with women his whole life. He told investigators, "Women are unfaithful, they screw around a lot, they cheat, and they are not of the highest moral value. They cheat and they are users." It was never clarified why he had these rather negative feelings towards women, nor if Robert had a psychological disorder or not. But his failed marriages may have harbored in him a deep hatred for women. As of April of 2022, Robert Browne is still serving his sentence at the Lemon Correctional Facility in Lemon, Colorado. He remains convicted solely in the murders of Miss Sperry and Miss Church, and no further murders have been conclusively linked to him since. 2 tip lines have been set up through the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for any information about Robert and his other possible victims. 915-520-7209, 915-492-7349. Thanks for watching today. Please do subscribe and let us know in the comments if you have any stories that you want us to cover. And please tune in next week for another episode filled with scary, strange, and mysterious stories, because who knows, maybe your town will be next.